Okay, today I bring to you a tier list of infectious diseases based on their mortality rates. So we're going for a bunch of well-known diseases that most of you should have heard of at some point. And we're prioritizing or sorting them rather by their mortality rates. So how fatal the disease is. So it's got nothing to do with how many people have been infected, how many people have died in total. It's all to do with just the mortality rate of the disease without any treatment. So there's a lot of diseases that have a high mortality rate, but with modern medicine, the treatment brings the mortality rate much further down. But we are just looking at the raw fatality rate of these diseases without any treatment, just seeing what the immune system can do against them. Okay, so we're going to do this by spinning a wheel, so I can randomly choose one. So let us begin. And we are landing on... that is smallpox. So, smallpox. You can get it from infected droplets through close contact with an infected person, sometimes from contaminated clothing and bedding. So the incubation period varies from 7 to 17 days. Symptoms of smallpox are a high fever, fatigue, severe back pain, sometimes abdominal pain and vomiting, rash with small bumps full of liquid and pus that spreads all over the body, ulcerated lesions in the nose and mouth. So this particular disease has a mortality rate of 30%. And just some notes on smallpox. It is responsible for some of the worst outbreaks in human history, and it was declared eradicated in 1980 by the WHO, the World Health Organization. So we go back to a little tier list thing here. We have smallpox, and that 30% fatal brings it into a category of C tier, I think. So it's 1 in 3 roughly people die, which is pretty high, but there's much worse ones. Okay, next. So COVID-19, we all know about that one at this point. But I'll just go through some of the symptoms and various things. Okay, so you can catch it by through respiratory droplets, so inhalation of respiratory droplets, and also indirect contact with contaminated surfaces. Has an incubation period from 1 to 14 days. The most common symptoms are fever, dry cough, and tiredness. Less common symptoms are aches and pains, sore throat, diarrhea, conjunctivitis, headache, loss of taste or smell, a rash on skin, or discoloration of fingers or toes. It's an extremely contagious virus, as we all know, but its mortality rate, which is what this is all about, is only 3%, roughly. So, given that, it is actually F tier. Alright, next. Spinning that wheel. What do we got? We have... Okay, so tetanus is bacterial. infection. It is from the soil, dust, manure, saliva entering the body through some sort of wound, particularly puncture wounds, crush injuries, and injuries involving dead tissue. So other ways you can get tetanus is through surgical procedures, dental infections, insect bites, and injections. Incubation period is quite vast. It varies from 3 days up to 21 days. The symptoms are headache, fever, sweats, fast heart rate, blood pressure changes, jaw cramping, and inability to open the mouth, which gives it its nickname lockjaw, and painful muscle spasms and stiffness, particularly in the back, abdomen, and extremities, sudden severe spasms, trouble swallowing, and seizures. So it's a pretty serious one, tetanus. It has a mortality rate of 50% without treatment. Some couple of notes on tetanus. It's an extremely common bacteria. It's found everywhere around us, but it's only a problem if it enters the body of an unvaccinated person. So, if you're vaccinated against tetanus, you're fine. But if you are not, you are in quite a bit of trouble. These spasms that patients often experience can be so severe that they can break their own bones. This in itself can be fatal if they end up breaking their spine or other vital bones. So 50% mortality rate for that one there, which brings it up to B tier. This is a B tier. Where am I? B tier. Tetanus. Cool. Next. Spin the wheel, boys. What do we got? We have... Malaria amoeba. So this is a particularly bad one. It's very rare though. So if you contract this, you will get a condition called primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. So you can get this particular amoeba through the nose from warm fresh water, or in very rare cases insufficiently filtered unsterilized drinking water. So if you get warm fresh water up your nose, or if you use poorly filtered unsterilized drinking water to do like nasal irrigation or anything like that, there is a small chance that you can contract this amoeba. And what it does is it burrows into the olfactory nerve and rides it directly to the brain, at which point it starts feeding on your brain. Incubation is 2 to 15 days, and the symptoms are severe frontal headache, fever, nausea, vomiting, disturbances of smell and taste, stiff neck, seizures, altered mental status, hallucinations, and finally a coma. One thing to note is the mortality rate is 98.5%, and it usually kills the host within 1 week, which is extremely fast. So if you get this, you're pretty much dead. There's a very, very little chance that you'll survive. So that is definitely S tier. S tier for the amoeba. Okay. Let's keep going. What's this one? which is a virus. Okay, so symptoms of dengue. Okay, so first of all, you get it from mosquitoes, mosquito bites in tropical and subtropical climates. Incubation of 4 to 10 days. Symptoms are high fever, severe headache, aches, nausea, vomiting, swollen glands, and a rash. There is a note on this one that there are almost 400 million infections each year of dengue fever, so it is very, very common. But it only has an average mortality rate of 3%. So that goes in with COVID at F tier. F tier for dengue, despite it being so prevalent in the population. Okay. Next. Pneumoniae. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but so this is a condition caused by the Streptococcus bacteria, and if you get Streptococcus pneumoniae meningitis, just knowing that it's a form of meningitis should let you know that it's very serious. So you can get this from direct contact with an infected person via respiratory droplets. Incubation is 1 to 3 days, so it's very, very fast acting. It doesn't stay inactive for very long. The symptoms are severe headache, stiff neck, high fever, chills, photophobia, which is a sensitivity to light, confusion, vomiting, weakness. A couple of notes on this is meningitis can be caused by all sorts of different infectious germs. The type of germ greatly influences how serious meningitis is, so generally any type of bacterial meningitis, which this one is considered the most lethal form. This particular bacteria, the Streptococcus, has over 100 variations, and a great number of people carry some form of this bacteria in their respiratory tract. But only a minority of these variations can cause Streptococcus pneumoniae meningitis or pneumococcal meningitis infections. So, bearing all that in mind, the mortality rate, if you do not get treatment quickly, and you have to get it very quickly, is 70%, which is very high. So, that places this one is A tier. You don't want to mess around if you have this. Next. More complicated because there are different types of infections you can get through anthrax. So firstly, anthrax is a bacteria, and there are three variations of a type of infection that you can get. So firstly, how you can get it is from exposure to anthrax spores, either from inhalation, eating or drinking contaminated food and water, or through cuts and scrapes in the skin. Usually exposure comes from working with infected animals or eating insufficiently cooked infected meat. So depending on the way it enters the body depends, is what determines which type of infection you get. So there is cutaneous, gastrointestinal, and inhalation. Cutaneous is the one that you would get if you got the anthrax bacteria through cuts and scrapes in the skin. So the incubation of cutaneous anthrax is 1 to 7 days. Symptoms are small blisters or bumps that may itch or swell, painless skin sores with black center, sometimes fever and headache. Mortality rate is 20% for cutaneous anthrax. Gastrointestinal anthrax. If you eat contaminated food or drink contaminated water, you will get this type. The incubation is 1 to 7 days. The symptoms are fever, chills, swollen neck or neck glands, and abdomen. Sore throat, nausea, bloody vomiting and diarrhea, headache, red face and eyes, stomach pain and fainting. Mortality rate 55%. Now, if you get the inhalation form of anthrax, this is particularly bad. The incubation period is a lot longer. It's 1 to 8 weeks. Symptoms are fever, chills, extreme sweats, chest discomfort, shortness of breath, confusion, dizziness, cough, nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, headache, extreme tiredness, and body aches. Mortality rate of inhalation anthrax is 90%. So if we take the 3 of them and we average out the 3 values, the overall mortality rate of an anthrax infection is 55%, which I believe places it in B tier. Yeah, B tier for anthrax. There's a lot of info there. But yeah, what does it look like again? This one, B tier for anthrax. Alright, and we shall spin that wheel. Typhoid, eh? Typhoid. Typhoid is bacteria. You get this from contaminated fecal ingestion, generally via exposed food or water. So you might eat some food, drink some water that has fecal matter in it. Incubation period for typhoid fever is 1 to 30 days. Symptoms are high fever, headache, weakness, stomach pain, diarrhea or constipation, cough, loss of appetite, sometimes a rash, rarely internal bleeding. Mortality rate of 15%, so not too bad. That's a D tier. D tier for typhoid there. D tier. Next. What do we got? We have... plague. Everyone should know about the plague, I think. So the plague is a bacterial infection. There are 2 types. There's the bubonic plague and the pneumonic plague. The way you can get the plague is from bites of small mammals and their fleas, direct contact with infected tissue, and, in the case of a pneumonic plague, inhalation of infected respiratory droplets. Incubation of 1 to 7 days. The general symptoms for both are fever, chills, aches, weakness, nausea, and vomiting. Bubonic specific symptoms are swollen, painful lymph nodes that turn into open sores filled with pus. Sounds lovely. Can spread to lungs and become pneumonic from there. The pneumonic specific symptoms are chest pain, shortness of breath, and coughing up blood. Bubonic plague can kill within 10 days. The pneumonic plague is extremely aggressive and kills within 48 hours. Now, they both have different mortality rates. Bubonic plague mortality rate is 45%, which is high. almost 1 in 2 people without treatment will die. The pneumonic plague mortality rate is 100%. Nobody's ever survived it. Again, without treatment. So if you take both values, split them down the middle, you get an average mortality rate of 72.5%, which I believe will place it in A tier. That's an A tier for the plague. Yeah, so I think it's reasonably rare these days. Let's continue. What's this colourful one? This is Hepatitis D. Gobstopper or something. Hepatitis D. Hepatitis D. So, firstly, you need hepatitis B before you can get hepatitis D. But if you do get hepatitis D, it is the most lethal of all hepatitis variants. So the symptoms, the way you can get hepatitis is contact with blood or other body fluids. So that includes intercourse with an infected partner, injections through infected syringes, and rarely from mother to child during birth. Incubation for hepatitis is 2 to 8 weeks. The symptoms are jaundice, stomach ache, abdominal pain, vomiting, fatigue, loss of appetite, joint pain, dark urine, light-coloured stool. Mortality rate for hepatitis D is 11%, which I believe places it in D tier. So that's D tier for hepatitis, the colourful one. Alright. Let's keep going. We have diphtheria. Diphtheria is a bacterial infection that you can get from respiratory droplets and touching infected open sores or ulcers. Incubation is 1 to 10 days. The symptoms are weakness, sore throat, mild fever, swollen glands in the neck. Sometimes infects the skin, causing open sores or ulcers. Mortality rate of 10%. 10%, which places it in E tier. Diphtheria, E tier. So we've got at least one in every tier now. That's pretty cool. Let's keep this going. Okay, we have. Ooh. Particularly lethal flu. Influenza A, H5N1 bird flu virus. So, you get this from close contact with infected live or dead birds or contaminated areas. Incubation is 2 to 7 days. Symptoms are high fever, weakness, tiredness, cough, sore throat, muscle aches, abdominal pain, chest pain, diarrhea, difficulty breathing, neurological changes like altered mental status or seizures. So pretty serious there. Mortality rate of 60%. 60% places it in A tier. So it's not a flu that you want to get. What did it look like again? There it is. Okay. So you can get this from exposure to fresh urine droppings or saliva of infected rodents. Incubation is 1 to 8 weeks. Symptoms are fatigue, fever, muscle aches, headaches, dizziness, chills, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, coughing, shortness of breath, and chest tightness. It has a mortality rate of 37%, which places it in C tier. I've forgotten what it looked like. There it is. C tier. Alright. Away we go. Here we go. It is called, let me just do that, African trypanosomiasis, something like that. Anyway, it's otherwise known as sleeping sickness, caused by a parasite. So you get this from the bites of infected tsetse flies, pass from mother to child, contaminated needles, or sexual contact. Incubation period is from 1 week all the way to 1 year. And that is because there are actually 2 types of sleeping sickness infection. They're both caused by the same parasite, but they progress differently. One is chronic and the other is acute. So they both have similar symptoms, but the incubation period and the time till death is much quicker with the acute type. So symptoms are fever, headaches, enlarged lymph nodes, joint pains, itching, sometimes a painful sore at the bite location, behavioral changes, confusion, sensory disturbances, poor coordination, hallucinations, seizures, sleep cycle disturbance. The sleep cycle disturbance is often reversed, so they tend to be asleep during the day and awake at night, and that's why it has the name sleeping sickness. Now, mortality rate is 99.9% without treatment. So this is one that if you have no access to treatment, you're basically dead if you get it. Time till death for the acute version is just a few months. Not entirely sure exactly how many, but just a few months. And the chronic time till death is about 3 years. So you can live with it for 3 years if you have the chronic type. But yeah, because of that high mortality rate, S tier for sure. There it is. Little friend, join us up there. Yep, okay. Next. So we have the Ebola virus. So you get this from close contact with blood, secretions, organs, or other bodily fluids of infected animals and people. Incubation of 2 to 21 days. Symptoms of fever, fatigue, muscle aches, headache, sore throat, vomiting, diarrhea, rash, impaired kidney and liver function, and sometimes both internal and external bleeding. We should all know about Ebola. There was an outbreak not too long ago. And it is a very messy virus. The symptoms are very messy. So it has a mortality rate of 50%, so 1 in 2 people will die with Ebola, which places it in B tier, 50% for our Ebola friend there, B tier. Right, we're getting down to the last few now. We have the Marburg virus. Which is actually very of hemorrhagic fever class viruses. Marburg virus. So you get this from exposure to infected fruit bats or monkeys, as well as direct contact with the blood, secretions, organs, or other bodily fluids of infected people. You can also get it from surfaces and materials contaminated with these fluids. So, incubation is 2 to 21 days. Symptoms are high fever, severe headache, malaise, muscle aches, severe diarrhea, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, extreme lethargy, rash, severe hemorrhaging, confusion, irritability, and aggression. This is the most deadly form of a hemorrhagic fever virus. It has a mortality rate of 60%, which puts it in A tier, so it's above Ebola, the Marburg virus. We have a more friendly one here. Wow, it's not as fatal. This is SARS. Same family as COVID-19, actually. So we have SARS. Once I can find it. There it is. So you get this from respiratory droplets and indirect contact with contaminated surfaces. Incubation period is 2 to 10 days. Symptoms are fever, chills, headache, malaise, muscle pain, dry cough, shortness of breath. Mortality rate of 9.5%, so it's a lot more fatal than COVID. But as we know, it did not spread nearly as much as COVID did. Anyway, 9.5%, which puts it in E tier. There we go. SARS. Alright, let's keep going. Tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a bacteria. Well, it's a bacterial infection. And you can get it from inhaling droplets from an infected person. Incubation is 2 to 12 weeks, quite a long incubation. Symptoms are fever, chills, night sweats, bad persistent cough, sometimes accompanied with blood, chest pain, weakness, fatigue, loss of appetite. Some notes on tuberculosis. It usually infects the lungs, but it can infect any organ in the body, which would present varying symptoms depending on the location of infection. TB, as it's often called, is responsible for the most deaths by far of any bacteria ever recorded, with over 1 billion total lives claimed. 1 billion. It is believed that around a quarter of the world's population have a dormant form of TB in their system. Most of the time it stays dormant for their entire life, under the control of the immune system, but rarely it will awaken, and the chance of that happening is higher in people with compromised or weakened immune systems, such as people with HIV or any other immunocompromising disease. It has a overall mortality rate of 45%. That's without treatment. But even with treatment, it is still not great. I believe it's a lot lower, but it's still not great. And the treatment is very harsh on the body. Months and months of different antibiotics, and it's terrible. So mortality rate of 45%, which places it in B tier. Tuberculosis in B tier. Yes, along with tetanus and all the rest of those ones there. Okay. Next up, we have... Oh, I was waiting for this one. Rabies. Now, rabies is the most deadly virus that we have discovered on the planet thus far. So there are actually two different types of rabies infection, the furious type and the paralytic type. The furious type is the more common one that we often associate rabies with. Paralytic type is a bit more mild, but still just as deadly in the long run. So you can get rabies from bites or scratches of an infected animal, particularly dogs and bats. Incubation period anywhere from 1 week up to 1 year. So the onset symptoms are the fever, headache, weakness, pain and tingling or a prickling sensation at the wound site. And then from there on, these symptoms change depending on if it's furious or paralytic. The furious symptoms are hyperactivity, intense agitation, anxiety and fear, hypersalivation, difficulty swallowing, throat spasms, hydrophobia, which is a fear of water, sometimes aerophobia, which is a fear of wind, drafts or fresh air, hallucinations, coma, and eventual cardiorespiratory arrest. Paralytic symptoms are the neurological symptoms can be similar to furious rabies, but there's a gradual paralysis of muscles starting at the wound and spreading from there, slowly developing coma and eventual respiratory failure. Mortality rate of rabies is practically 100%. I think in all of human history there's only been a handful of survivors, and of those only one person in all of human history survived rabies without any type of treatment. One person. So you can basically say 100%. If you don't get the vaccine in time and the symptoms start, you are dead. You are dead. There's no question. So furious rabies will kill you within 2 weeks. So it's 1 to 2 weeks. Paralytic rabies will take 4 to 5 weeks. And an interesting note of rabies that I find fascinating. It's a fascinating virus. It travels along the central nervous system rather than in the blood. So that means it's extremely stealthy. It almost can't be detected. It's virtually undetectable in any kind of test before symptoms begin. So if you don't get the vaccination, there's no way of knowing that you have rabies or not until it starts, basically. So it's terrible, it's frightening, and it is S tier because of that mortality rate. Rabies, S tier. Okay. One of the lesser known ones on this list, but it's been mentioned in some things. I think there's an episode of House that discusses it. The person has it. Anyway, Leptospirosis it's a bacteria or bacterial infection. You get it from contact with urine of infected animals or contact with water, soil or food contaminated with the urine of infected animals. Incubation period of 2 to 28 days, so it's quite a large incubation variance there. Symptoms of high fever, headache, chills, muscle aches, vomiting, jaundice, red eyes, abdominal pain, diarrhea and a rash. Mortality rate of 17%, so not too high, but could be better. That's a D tier for Leptospirosis. Okay. Final 3, is it? Yeah. Oh, here we go. Here we go. These are one of the scariest microscopic things on the planet, I think. So what a prion is a misfolded protein. A protein that has folded incorrectly. It spreads its pattern to surrounding proteins, and it basically just spreads from there. You can get them from eating infected meat or brain tissue, from organ, blood, or tissue donations, or from insufficiently cleaned medical equipment. Sometimes they can be passed through genes, or very rarely spontaneously without a cause. Which is probably the most scary thought. So prions have an incubation period of 1 to 40 years, which is insanity. So you can get an infection of a prion, and then 40 years later you can develop symptoms and die. So there's a wide variety of symptoms depending on which prion infection you get, or which prion disease you get, and what part of the brain it primarily targets. Generally though, the neurological symptoms are always present. So these are symptoms such as personality changes, blurred vision or blindness, hallucinations, rapid dementia, difficulty walking, muscle stiffness, confusion, fatigue, difficulty speaking, insomnia, difficulty swallowing, coma. Prion diseases are always fatal with no exceptions. There's no treatment, we have nothing that we can do against prions. So a mortality rate of 100% without fail. Usually they will kill the host within 14 months, so reasonably slow acting, I suppose, but always fatal with some pretty terrible symptoms. Some other notes about prions is that they are extremely resilient and hard to destroy. If the peptide bonds are not severed, they can reform and reinfect. And the most famous prion disease is bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE, most commonly known as mad cow disease, and that spread to humans a while back. Became known as variant CJD. We know about the mad cow disease scare a few years ago. And that's why it was such a big thing, because prion diseases are unstoppable. So without a doubt, S tier. Yep. Final 2. We have it stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and it's a type of bacteria. So you can get this from the bacteria entering a wound, such as a cut, puncture, gash, surgical incision, or sharing personal items, such as towels or razors that have touched infected skin. Incubation period of 1 to 10 days. Symptoms are red, swollen, painful, pus-filled wound. Fever can cause bloodstream infections triggering sepsis. It's classified as a superbug because it's resistant to many common antibiotics. So this bacteria is resistant to a lot of different antibiotics. Makes it very hard to treat, and it has quite a decent mortality rate of 38% as well, without treatment. So it's pretty bad. You don't want to get it. You don't want to get this one. Probably don't want to get any of these, to be honest, but MRSA puts it at 38%, puts it at C tier. And we have our last one, which I don't even have to spin the wheel for, but sure. And we have, I wonder what it is. Parasitic infection. So with malaria, you get it from the bites of infected mosquitoes, much like dengue. Incubation is 10 to 15 days. Symptoms are fever, headache and chills. And it averages around 200 million infections per year, so it's very common again. Mosquitoes, man. They are extremely insane. And it is generally believed that malaria, despite having a very low mortality rate, has claimed the most lives of any infectious disease in human history. And that's purely because of how widespread and how many people get this infection all the time from mosquitoes. So despite having claimed the most lives of any infectious disease in human history, it only has a mortality rate of 0.5%, so only 0.5%. That just shows how widespread and how many people have been infected by malaria. So that's F tier, based entirely on mortality rate. And there we have it. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this. And with that, I will bid you a good day. Farewell.